manager training this year. We are excited to have everyone here. I know people have been kind of tapping into these online as well, so I think that's a good thing. Hopefully everyone finds these useful and time well spent when they get to them. So just as a quick refresher, as we go through this, we'll definitely stop in places just to field questions and kind of address them as they go. So, but as your questions come up, please feel free. And Dick, I think I always mess this up, but they should go ahead and use the chat function. Is that the best place to do it?
Actually, the questions.
The questions. I always get that backwards. I don't know why, but so yeah, if you've got questions, go ahead and use that, and we'll collect them and kind of take stops as we go through this along the way. And so tonight we are going to be talking about Instant Challenge, and certainly there's a lot of training and resource on this. So I think tonight I'm looking to focus a little bit more on kind of the I guess the more strategic ways to approach Instant Challenge, and really ways to kind of build the team's functioning versus the technical and the tactical approach to Instant Challenge. So hopefully we'll get you some tips and things along the lines of that, and then we'll talk a little bit more about kind of the general things as well for those of you who are not familiar with it at all, if you will. So we will go ahead and get started here. So so basically, just talk a little bit about what makes up Instant Challenge. And like I said, this will be for folks who still don't kind of fully understand what these things do and how they work and that. So we'll spend a few minutes on that, and then I want to talk about some different things that teams do well in Instant Challenge, and kind of those skill sets that some of the individual team members have and things like that. Talk about interference when it comes to Instant Challenge, because unlike your central challenge, this actually is very different in IC. And then talk a little bit about how your team can really, and I use the word attack, not approach or not take on, really how do they get after these instant challenges and really take an approach that is going to be very effective and fun, and that gets into those kind of different strategies. And then talk about some of the things as we go along in sort of harnessing the strengths of your own team and turning them from a good IC team to a great IC team as we go down the road. So we'll go ahead and kind of jump in here and get started. Just very basic parts of Instant Challenge, and hopefully everybody's pretty familiar with these, and so this will be just quick review. But essentially you really have three main types of Instant Challenges. You have ones where you build, where they're given some specific task or something that they have to create or build out of a set of given materials. There are acting ones where they're going to have to put together a skit. They're going to have to do some sort of dramatic presentation. Next one are going to be logic ones where there's a problem they got to figure out. Is how do they kind of beat the challenge that's in front of them, and those will typically have a lot more moving pieces to them, kind of a setup that's there, and then they've got to figure it out. And then there's combinations of all of those things. Building a statue and creating a song to that statue. Just a million different ways that you can combine these things. And so, but that's where they're all going to be. They're going to be one of those essentially three things, either standalone or in combination with the other two. And so that at least allows you to know that there are a certain number of skills that you're going to need. Now, obviously, there's an infinite number of instant challenges that you could come up with, but there's a finite number of skills that your team needs to be able to take on any of those. And that's kind of the point, is that you certainly learn different different approaches to things that can adapt no matter what's there. So that's definitely I think one of the things to kind of keep in mind as you get into this. And then when you think about the different skill sets, and every person, every team has strengths. They have skills that they have. And I think that some of those things are real easy to see, and some of those things are real obvious. You may have, and you've got them kind of here. These are different types of skill sets, different sort of things that people will lean towards, teams will lean towards, being creative, being practical. Practical is actually a really good skill when you have these, because sometimes that practical team member can really cut through the noise and kind of the stuff that doesn't matter, and really get to the heart of what you're trying to fix or what you're trying to build, and do things like that. And builders and actors, you've got rule followers, which is important, because as you get into the way the challenges are written, you're going to need those people to be paying attention. And then directors, leaders types of things, and motivators. There's just a lot of different skills and things that come around besides just being able to build a tower out of straws and toothpicks. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but I think the key is to not just, sort of drop your kids into buckets automatically. It's to sort of force them around as you're practicing these things, having them take turns doing different things and finding out what they're good at, because the one that you may not think is the most practical kid may wind up being the one who sees things the clearest. And the same thing with who may not be the most motivating one that you think is actually going to be the most natural leader on the team. And so make sure that you're not sort of forcing them into their preconceived notions of what they do and don't do well. So that way it'll give the team not only the strongest skill sets, but also the most flexibility when they start to find all these different things that they can do and the things that they're good at. So I think that'll be definitely key consideration as you go along here. So the last sort of basic piece of this is scoring. And as you're practicing these instant challenges, you should really make sure that the kids are paying attention to how the scoring is structured. Because that's what the appraisers are looking at, and those are the things that are determined to be important to that particular instant challenge. So if they're not paying close attention to how the scoring's built, and talk a little bit about each one of these, then it's going to be really difficult to kind of focus on it the right way. So the first one that's in there is creativity. There's always something in there around creativity, just almost without exception. But there's a couple of different ways that creativity can be worked into a challenge. So they want to make sure they're paying attention to kind of where that word falls. And experienced teams, you can tell when they read through challenges, they'll make a note of it mentally, and they'll actually verbalize it, if there is that word in there and where it sort of lands. So creativity can really be around how you approach a solution, how you deliver your dramatic piece of it. Sometimes it's on the creativity of the use of materials. And where that comes into play is sometimes there's no score on the creativity of the use of material, or on how you build a structure. It's just, do you build the structure, or do you build a tower that works? So keep that in mind. So sometimes it's all about how you use something, and are you adapting and using things in a creative way? And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just about getting it done. The other piece that is always in them, there's never one that doesn't have this, is how well does your team work together? And this is what we're going to kind of talk about as we go along here. This is what you're really striving for. The teams that I think have really reached that highest skill set are not just the ones that know how to, they know instantly 30 ways to use a marshmallow and 14 ways how to use a piece of spaghetti, and all these different things, and they can build any tower this way and that and all of this. The teams that have really gotten to that top piece are the ones that have that masterful teamwork. And I think the easiest way to kind of describe, because that's a tough one, like, what is this teamwork? Everyone talks about it. To me, the teamwork portion of it is when your team starts to go after the central goal. They start to work in one direction without actually saying that's what they're going to do. When they just start to work together and they just kind of know where they're going and they communicate effectively, and it doesn't become an effort that they have to make. It's just something that they know, and it's something that they do. That's where you're really striving for, is just that higher level of communication and teamwork, and they just sort of sense it, and they kind of move around with each other, and they know when somebody needs help and when somebody doesn't, and they know when to jump in and when not to jump in. And then the next piece of it is this objective scoring and risk and reward. They kind of go together, because a lot of times it'll be, building something that's a certain number of inches tall, or that can hang off a table by a certain amount of distance, or things like that, and you get more points the further out you go. Sometimes risk and reward is important for them to be paying attention to as they're thinking about their solution. So, if 30 inches is the maximum score they can get on one category, but they don't think they can get to 30, do they want to even try? you know, as they're kind of scamming and going through their brainstorming and getting things together and figuring out, it's like, well, you know what, maybe it's better to get 25 points instead of 40 points on this. Let's just go with what we know we can make work, and let's not try and get to the top and have it fall over and wind up with 5 points. It's part of the evaluation. It's part of them sort of brainstorming and thinking about that. And then certainly the last one here is the differences in instructions and how things are talked about, and making sure that they're paying attention to the things you have to do and the things that you can't do. Because inevitably, when you watch Instant Challenge and teams who take it on and teams that get a little bit behind, even sometimes the great teams do it, is they just miss a piece of the directions that's really key, and they'll lose points just because they didn't follow something along, not because they didn't know how, it's just they just didn't read it, and they just didn't pay attention to it. So that's always a key to it. There's you know, most of the words that are in those Instant Challenges are there on purpose. So they need to make sure that they're reading them effectively and getting to that scoring and understanding what they need to do in order to accomplish the score. So that's definitely an important component of that, of the scoring piece. So that's kind of the basic pieces of Instant Challenge. Before we get to the interference, just real quick, are there any immediate questions on sort of the components of the Instant Challenge, sort of some of those basic level things that anybody needs to get out there? Sounds like a no. All right, we'll keep going then. So let's talk about interference. This is a big difference between Central Challenge and Instant Challenge. An Instant Challenge, because when they actually go to tournament and when they perform there, you have no role in that. If you are fortunate enough to be the one, or unfortunate enough, as some people like to think, to go into the challenge room when they do their IC, you don't really have any option but to sit still, you know, to just watch, sit on your hands, bite your lip, whatever. That's all you get to do. So you can't interact or impact what's happening at that point. So because of that, everything that happens during practice is really just, you know, it's just teaching them the skills. And so during practice, when you're doing Instant Challenge, you are allowed to essentially interfere in any way, shape, or form. You know, as they're going through an Instant Challenge, you are more than welcome to stop the challenge at any point and give them instruction. You can help them learn how to do the stuff. You can talk to them about, you know, oh, you guys are trying to build something with this. Have you thought about using it this way? You know, I mean, they should be coming up with as many ideas as possible, but you can show them how to do things. You can teach them skills. You know, you can use outside sources on the use of materials. That stuff is all okay for them to do. They don't have to come up with those ideas 100% on their own during Instant Challenge, because when you do the Instant Challenge itself, it's all recall, it's all application of skill versus actually somebody doing it for them. So the other place where this actually becomes a great time to teach is when they're acting and when they're doing things. And this has, you know, it has great impact for not just the Instant Challenge, but it has great impact for their Central Challenge too, because it'll flow over as you teach them acting techniques into when they're doing their Central skit. And so, you know, it's even kind of a nice bonus there too. But, you know, you can kind of stop them and tell them, hey, why don't you, you know, you need to speak up. We can't hear you over here. Things that you really can't do when you're doing Central Challenge teaching, you can do an Instant Challenge teaching. So it's kind of a nice thing there. And then really working on their teamwork. And we'll talk about some things you can do to practice these different things in a minute, but really pointing out where there's opportunities to work together as a team. So let's say you maybe have one team member that's kind of quiet and doesn't really get engaged. You know, when you're brainstorming, you can actually go in there and you can kind of sit behind and go, well, what do you think? Why don't you say something here? You know, or, hey, did you guys ask Bobby here what he thinks? Because he might have a pretty good idea. You know, so there's a lot of different things that you can engage and you know, help them with there and get involved there. The other nice thing about this is you can videotape them and you can watch it with them and break it down for them. I mean, you know, for Central Skit, they can certainly videotape themselves and they can watch it and they can give themselves feedback. But during the Central Skit, you're not really to be doing things like that and going, oh yeah, see, here's where you did. But in Instant Challenge, you can absolutely do those things with them. And in fact, that videotape thing is a great tool for them to sort of watch and see what they're doing, and it helps them kind of understand. It's like, oh yeah, I would see that. That would be kind of hard to understand what we're doing there. Here's a good technique to do that and make things a little easier to do. And then, like we talked about, all of this stuff spills over into the central challenges. They're getting better at presenting and thinking and talking and doing. It starts to show up in their central challenge in the way that they speak and the way that they project their voice and the way that they work together like that and make things clearer. As they're building these instant challenge skits, they start to think about, are we doing that in our central challenge, and are we making our stories easy to follow and interesting and entertaining and doing all these things that would make them, more fun to watch. So it's definitely a good time to, to kind of work together with them both and help them through it. Like I said, it's a great way to help them build those skills and just kind of continue to push it along. So as you're kind of working on practicing ICTs, it really is more than just, here's an instant challenge, let's go through it. Okay, we did it. Let's talk about what we could have done better, or what ideas would we have had different. That's certainly one way, sort of that post-challenge analysis, if you will. But to me, it's not as much about that, because honestly, I think any given instant challenge, the team that's the greatest instant challenge performers of all time could easily miss the idea that they would have, because it's timed, it's pressure, you're moving quickly. You don't always have time to get to the best idea, but you need to have the ability to get to a good idea and then make it great as you attack it. But part of that is really helping the team get comfortable with their techniques and their strategies, because then it sort of becomes part of the process and part of what they're doing. And a couple of things that I mean like that. So, some teams, when they're waiting for the challenge and it's being read to them and they're getting ready to go time and go, some of them will just sort of all attack to the table at once. Others will take a little bit more of a, one or two people pick up the papers and are reading through them, and the other people start organizing the materials, and other teams, just everybody does everything at once. I don't believe that either one is better or worse. I think that some things are better for some teams and some things are worse for, some teams. It just depends on the people you have on your team. And as you're doing that with the team, you're also doing that, we talked about this a little earlier, is kind of getting each person into the roles that are going to be best suited for them, so that they can start to build their confidence and they can start to be better at it and continue to feel like they're going to contribute at a high level as you go into these things. And you're the one that's going to know that about your team. It's not me. I have a team of high school boys that have been doing this for a long time. They have a totally different style than a team of fourth graders who are in their first year and maybe have some really varying levels of confidence on all the members of the team. So I have to approach teaching my kids differently than you're going to have to approach teaching yours. So there's no right or wrong here. I think it's really just an effort to make the team as strong as they can and to have them sort of be who they are. You're always trying to get them to be as creative as possible, but there's some teams out there that are, kind of serious, and maybe they don't have a lot of people with really wacky senses of humor. They're just, they're kind of real creative, real smart kids, but they don't really go way out there and get wacky and silly. And so maybe you're not trying to push them so far out on that end of the spectrum. Maybe you're encouraging them to be more thoughtful and interesting and creative, because that's what they're going to be good at. So, it's a tough balance. You want them to push out, you want them to find new places, but you also have to understand that your team's going to have a style when they do these things. So some things to kind of think about as you're going through this is, should you have assigned roles or should you not have assigned roles? And what we mean by assigned roles is, do you have somebody who reads the challenge and sort of keeps an eye on the the rules? Are we doing everything right? Is there somebody who's in charge of keeping time? Do you have 2 or 3 people on the team that are really assigned at the build and 2 or 3 people are always assigned at the skit? I think for some teams that works very, very well. I encourage you to give it a try and see how it works for you. Other teams, not as much. Other teams are more fluid, and they, depending on who's got the ideas for that particular challenge, they'll kind of have them fall into the places that they fall into. The same thing with kind of leaders or not leaders. Sometimes that can work to the advantage of the team, depending on who your kids are. If you have some kids that maybe tend to be a little overbearing sometimes, I don't think it's such a good idea for leaders, but it's your team, you'll know what's best, and you'll kind of see what works and what doesn't. I think if the people who are going to be in charge, as the leaders are, making sure that they're not running over everybody else and kind of bullying the way to ideas and things like that, then it can be very effective, but you got to be careful with it at the same time. I find that the teams that are the strongest don't have a defined leader, but I've seen teams with defined leaders where the leaders do a great job, and it's extremely effective for them. So it's definitely something that you may or may not want to do there. I put on here depending on each other. This is definitely key. Whether you have leaders or you don't have leaders, everybody needs to understand that they have to count on the other people on the team to be as good as they can be. There are no teams out there where you have multiple members of the team and one person does everything and makes that the best it can be. It just doesn't happen. Even the best of the builders, best of the actors, they need everybody else to help build their ideas up to continue to grow. Whatever it is, the idea or the skit or the build, and keep coming with ideas. Nobody has every idea in their head, and so it's important for even the most type A kid out there to kind of realize that, and that's something you should be pointing out to them. And if they continue to do it in a way that doesn't, we talk about inclusion here, not just the kids that are shy and pulling them into the mix, but making sure that the kids who are just sort of in the middle of the pack are being included in those ideas. Sometimes I've seen some real strong-willed kids who come up with a lot of the ideas, they check in when they come up with an idea. Hey, so we thought about doing this. I didn't hear anybody else say anything. Are you guys okay with this? Is this what we want to do? Or are there other ideas? I think that's a really good strategy to make sure that they're including and that they are counting on the other kids, because sometimes somebody might have a little extra idea or a little tweak to the idea that, the main idea didn't encompass the first time, and that gets also more to that natural teamwork where they're just like, they get used to adding on, and just because I changed your idea doesn't mean I didn't like it. It just means that I had an idea to add to it, and that the person whose idea is getting changed gets used to having their ideas changed, and it's no big deal. I think when you see teams that don't practice into that strategy, that sometimes you can see the egos get bruised and people's feelings get hurt both ways, either being ignored or people feeling like somebody's walking on their idea, and that's not fair. Because there's something you just really want to avoid there is that they get into these real snippety arguments or disagreements with tone, if you will. I think it's pretty rare to just see a full-blown argument in an IC, but I've definitely seen it. I know anybody who's been around it long enough has seen it happen, where the team just starts to just break down. But that's not the norm. Norm is there's friction and tension, and there's tone of voice, and people kind of saying negative things to each other in the middle of the IC. That's going to hurt them. That will yield, generally poorer results from what they produce, as well as, teamwork scores will be hurt by that. So if you have problems with those kinds of things, encourage them to use, this may seem very silly, but have them actually verbalize the positive thoughts. I think that's a good practice to get them into it and acting the right way. It's like, wow, that's a good idea. We should do that. I like what you're thinking there. Or, oh yeah, we could use that piece. That's a helpful thing. Thanks. Just whatever it is that works for you guys, have them verbalize it. Because it does two things. It increases that interaction in a positive way, and it also kind of helps as you're going through things and you're working through the quick, the front end of stuff. It helps people kind of, you're giving your yes vote, and they can kind of check you off the list and know that this is something that you support. So that's definitely another thing. The other piece here is this attack versus solve, and this gets into personality of the team. Some teams are very aggressive, and they're very almost, it's a controlled, frantic behavior as they go into the challenge and they go to attack it. And they're all talking at once, but they're all talking together. And, that's a style. And it can be really fun to watch if it's effective and if the team's still connected, but everybody's kind of running and going and blah, blah, blah. Other teams don't do it that way, and they shouldn't do it that way because it's not them. Some teams will be very calm, and one person will read the challenge and the rest of them will sit there and think, and then they'll talk one at a time and come up with their idea, and they still are an effective team and they solve things well. So, and there's things in between there. There's a lot of distance between calm approach and chaos. So definitely just understand your team and where they go, and encourage them to kind of get to that place where it's going to go. The other piece of this is kind of this wacky versus controlled, and this is more on how they approach the ideas, how they do the skits. The team doesn't have to have something bizarre and strange in their skit to make it good, and to make it enjoyable and make it creative. So if you have a team that's a little more stoic, or just maybe you just don't have a lot of funny kids on your team, then it's perfectly good for them to do what fits into their personalities and what they want. Sometimes the wackier skits can be a little fun to watch because they're silly or they're goofy and they do some strange stuff, but that's not necessarily how these things get scored. You want to get the appraisers laughing if it's funny, but I don't believe I've ever seen a score on an instant challenge where you get points for making the judge laugh. So, that's not a requirement of doing it. So definitely have your kids understand that. And maybe if you've got a little bit of both on your team, then you can have, kind of a little more serious, meaty plot with some fun stuff mixed in. There's a lot of ways to balance that, but definitely go there to really, maximize what you've got going. And then at the same time, and this is talking out on both sides of my mouth a little bit, and I know that, but this is the balance. This is where if you get it right, it really works well. Is understand where your strength is, but encourage them to to step out of that a little bit as well. And so if you've got the stoic team, make sure that they understand that it's okay to be silly, and it's okay to be kind of goofy, and it's okay to do a weird dance, whether you know how to dance or not. I mean, I was doing an instant challenge training over the last weekend, and one of the things that in my particular challenge that I was running for them, they had to sing a song. And one of the things I threw out to them was, once they were done and they kind of got done with it, and it's like, because sometimes kids get kind of embarrassed to do that sort of stuff. It's like, well, I don't sing. It's like, well, who's the worst singer on the team? Well, they should have led the song, because that would be really funny. Or it would be really cool. It's like to see the kid who doesn't sing very well leading the song would just be something that's different. And, maybe it turns out that you're not as bad of a singer as you thought. Or whatever it is, just try it. If it doesn't work, then you know that it didn't work, and, that's probably not where you're going to go when you attack it at the tournament. But at least you tried. What's the worst thing that happens if you try something silly in somebody's garage doing an instant challenge? You get a good laugh out of it. You go, wow, that was pretty bad. We probably shouldn't do that again, I guess, huh? Yeah, remember when you did that? That was pretty hilarious. So, I think that's the thing. It's the fear of failure. And honestly, what's the failure here? What happens? Nothing happens. You just, you learn something that you're not particularly good at. I think that's a key to a lot of these things, is that finding out what you don't like and what you're not good at can be as valuable as knowing what you are good at. So taking chances is part of this as well, for sure. So once you kind of have the basics, and you have you've covered some properties of materials, and you've you understand about creating skits, and every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you've kind of gone over how to build plot a little bit. There's different kinds, sort of the basic stuff. Then how do you take it from there into this thing we talk about, where it's just feels more comfortable, and the kids act like a team, and stuff just kind of flows in a different way? I'm not sure exactly how to sort of verbalize that, but when you see it, you know it. you're like, that team knows what they're doing. That was cool. You could feel it, you could see it, you sense it. So some things that that I have found are pretty helpful, and this first one I think is really helpful. I just call it quick starts. And really what this is instead of actually doing, practicing full instant challenges for, on any given practice, I will just have, 20, 30, 40 scenarios, just real high level sort of instant challenge-ish stuff as far as presenting a problem, and then I give the kids, 1 minute to come up with the solution, which forces them to effectively exchange ideas quickly, come to a conclusion on which idea they like, and decide which way they're going, and then flesh that idea out. And it can be really hard to do in a minute, but there's certain things that you can kind of teach the kids to do to be more effective at that. First and foremost is to speak your idea quickly. Can you sum your idea up in 10 words or less? A lot of times, especially with, I think, some of the younger kids, they'll kind of come up with an idea and they start to talk a little bit and they go, okay, well, all right, I have an idea. All right, I've got an idea here. All right, so here's my idea. It might not be that great, but here's my idea. The horses with the horns. We have a horse with a horn, like a unicorn. Okay, and then so that unicorn could be like walking around someplace, like maybe in a city or something like that. And then and it's just on and on and on. It's like, what's the idea? You got to get to it. Instead of saying, okay, how about this for an idea? Unicorn's walking through the city and he finds a magic potato that turns him into a hippopotamus. Can you say it that quickly? That's the first part of those quick starts. And then the other piece of that quick starts is to kick out three to four ideas fast. And honestly, when you're going for IC, and you're trying to figure out an idea, if you don't have the right idea inside of 3 or 4 ideas, then you should just go with the best one you got and make it work, because you could sit there for 2-3 minutes trying to sort of brainstorm an idea, and you don't have that much time. So it teaches them to get those ideas, a quick number of ideas, and then they have to come up with a consensus very quickly as well. And so those two skill sets are really important, to be able to verbalize your ideas quickly and to be able to come to a consensus quickly. Typically sort of checks a lot of the ego and the debate and the stuff that gets in the way of good decision making. When you're doing it fast, you don't have time to squabble. And a lot of times you have to come up with sort of quick compromises on those things. It's like, okay, well, how about we don't do a unicorn? How about we do a giraffe, because it'll be tall and, Bob's tall, and that'll be great. Cool, yeah, I like that. Let's do that. Because they know they have to go in a minute, and they got to get it going really fast. And so it just gets them into that mode, and then when they get into instant challenge, it won't feel like a panicked rush, and they don't feel that time pressure because they know how to effectively make decisions. And you can do this. If you spend a half an hour, you could do 20 quick starts. If you do something that many times, they become pretty good at it. So the more you do that, the better off they'll be at it. The other thing that comes into, and we'll talk a little bit more later, but as in the middle of instant challenges, sometimes you have to change directions because the idea you started with didn't work. And if you have that ability, those quick start, to generate ideas and shift and move and think very fast, then it becomes no big deal. It's like, oh, the pot isn't working right there. We're going to have to use these embroidery hoops and these, this other stuff to build it. Okay. What if we did that? And you could take that. No, yeah, we could do that, and then maybe we'll build this with it too. Perfect. All right, go, gone, and it's done. So it's just that combining and adapting, and you're doing it as a team, because if everybody's sort of spitting things out and moving quickly, you really do start to function as a team there, and then it just starts to become innate. It just becomes what you do and how you approach it. And the teams that jump in and go effectively and quickly, it's impressive to watch. It's like, yeah, that was neat. I like the way you guys sort of established and got your ideas rolling and did all those things. It was very good. So that's a very helpful practice set that I found is really good for teams because it has a lot of downstream impacts where they're going to really, they're going to benefit from it. The other thing here that I talk about is mastering the 5 signposts. It doesn't have to be 5, but the way that I explain this is when you're building your skit, and teams inevitably will do this, where they'll come up with a clever plot for a skit, or it's really more of an idea for a skit, and then they're just going to improv it, but they don't really flesh it out enough so that they can come up with a skit that has a flow, the beginning, the middle, and the end. So many of the skits in IC don't really end, they just kind of fizzle and they're done. So have some signposts along the way and really kind of know what the events are. You may not know how the events are going to unfold, but at least you know what their order is and what needs to happen and when you get to the end. I kind of, I've kind of explained it to people as you're walking through some wilderness and you know that you want to get to the other side of this wilderness where there's a house, but you can't see the house and you need to get there. Now, you may wander through this forest a little bit or this wilderness, but if you have landmarks along the way, like I know there's a lake, a little while over there, and then I know that I can see a mountain. When I get to the lake, I can see a mountain on the other side of that, and then, the sun will be setting, and so, I'm going to these places. Now, I probably will wander a little bit, and I won't be a straight line path, and I may go where I'm not supposed to go, but I know if I hit all these things, I'm getting to the house at the end of the journey. It's the same thing with your skit. If you kind of teach them to quickly come up with, it's almost like, all right, we're going to have scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, and scene 4. And this is what's going to, these are the events that happen, 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Perfect. That's all you need for your skit. The kids will backfill. And honestly, sometimes when they're backfilling and you talk about that improv, that's what really makes them great, because you start to get these limbic reactions to what's happening. And those are sometimes the most interesting and most, the most funny, the most dramatic things, the things that just sort of pop the best. So have them practice that when they're building their skits. Is what are the signposts? What's going to get us to the end of the plot? And then as you have that, get them comfortable with improving their behavior. People forget certain pieces of the scene. Okay, so start to develop skills about what do you do when somebody misses something? What do you do when somebody doesn't do one of the things that they're supposed to do? Do you stop and go, Sally, you're supposed to say this? That's not the right reaction. That's not the right behavior. The behavior would be, talking to the other individual in their character name and doing something funny with it. Like if somebody's over on the side and they forget they're supposed to be out there, instead of going, you're supposed to be over here, you kind of go, wow, remember when, Mondingo the spider was over here the other day? I sure wish he was here again, because he should be here now. And then whoever's playing Mondingo go, oh yeah, that's right, and they walk over, and and the key is to explain to them that the appraisers have no idea what the skit of this thing's going to be. Make it feel like it's going the way it's supposed to go, even if it's not, because they don't know the difference. And so, that improving your behavior is key, is playing off each other. When one of the kids comes up with an unplanned funny joke, go with it. Just keep it going, build it in, fold it into it. Make sure you hit your signpost and just keep folding all this fun stuff in, and it'll go. It'll be great. And as they start to get used to that idea and working together and playing off each other, you get this hive mentality. Like I say, it's kind of like we were talking about before, is that as the team starts to really gel together, they start doing things the same without actually communicating that they're going to do it. And it's just something you see, and it's something you feel when it clicks. You're just like, ooh, yeah, that was neat. There's a team. Because you can see how they just shifted from one thing to the other, or they just knew that they were going to be here and be there, and this was going to happen, and you could feel the way the skit it shifted and it adapted, and it all felt right. Those are the kinds of things when you get to that hive mentality thing. And I think the last thing of this is to get them to enjoy the instant challenge. Most of the teams like doing them, but get them to really, really enjoy it. And part of that is to encourage them. We talked about that, getting outside your comfort zone a little bit. So, maybe as you're doing your practices with your instant challenge, you do some silly activities so they get used to, not being just straight ahead, and, they can have some fun with that in practice, and they can have some fun with the tournament. Because everybody wants to score well. I know at the tournaments, all the teams want to win. But it's not about the win. It's about doing it the right way and having fun and having a good time, and, taking some chances for your team and taking some chances for yourself personally, and having that get pulled off and having it work well. That's kind of the key there. That's where it really, I think, becomes beneficial. So definitely practice those things over and over again as much as you can. I know we're getting close to tournaments now, but definitely spend a little time in the last month here before you get to tournament, and do a little bit of this stuff and get them thinking about these things and encourage them to do it, because it'll help a lot when they get there. So Dick, I've been talking pretty straight through here. Any questions coming in?
Actually, there haven't been, but we only have a few people online, so I'm going to unmute them and they can
Yep.
ask. I'm going to try to unmute them, in
Yep.
fact. Natalie, do you have any questions?
Nobody knew they were going to get called on tonight.
Right. I'm not
No
hearing
questions. Okay, that's all right. We don't require questions to attend, so that's all right. Okay, well, we'll just keep going then, and that means we'll definitely get done on time. So, we talked about sort of building that teamwork and sort of taking those sort of unwritten things to a different level. This is more about tactical stuff that your team can practice and learn and develop and kind of make it their own, because so many of the challenges there's only so many kinds of builds that you can do. There's only so many kinds of skits that you can come up with. So as they practice and they start to kind of come up with some cool stuff, log those things into their mental Rolodex, if you will, so that they can recall them and things. It's just, common materials as they do these builds is they come up with things that you see that are impressive, or they see, they recognize, like, ooh, that was a really cool way to use that. Have them sort of, make a note of it. Even, if you got a piece of paper over on the wall in the garage, write them down and then review the list. There's nothing wrong with kind of keeping those wowie, uses of materials in line. It's like building, taking pieces and creating things that span, distances greater than the length of them. That's always a tricky one, but there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's some pretty easy, common ways to do it, and then there's some things where you're like, wow, I didn't even think about using that for that. That's really cool. Make a note of those things. They'll be glad they have them, and it's a lot of times when you're doing builds, there's points for creativity, the use of your materials, and so why not give yourself a little leg up? You don't have to come with it completely out of the air at the tournament. It's okay to have things practiced. Believe me, the teams that are good at it, they practice a lot and they know these things. So the same thing with kind of universal plot points and favorite topics and stuff like that. Those are, are there particular plots, strategies that your team likes when they're doing their skits? There's certain kinds of characters that are real easy to fit in. Narrators is probably the first one that comes up that a lot of teams will use. Great. What other kinds of characters are there that your team likes that they want to use? Sometimes roving reporters are out there. Different kinds of things like that are characters that work for your team and that honestly can really apply in almost any plot that's out there. The same thing with different kinds of not materials, but imaginary props. that are in your skits that can allow you to take the story logically any place you want to go. I know a team that used to always work in a magic potato. It was kind of like an Aladdin's lamp type of thing. And they always had a magic potato in their skit. They just did. And they always did something weird with it, and it worked for them. But, those are different things that you can certainly have in your bag of tricks when you need them, because they're great when you get a little bit stuck, or maybe you're in the middle of the plot and you're not really sure where to go. Well, then somebody pulls the magic potato out of their pocket, and it gives you a little bit of a mental reset, so that you don't have to actively think about what you're doing for a second, which allows your brain to stop, kind of get going again, and then think about what it needs to do. Because sometimes when you're trying to always think about what's coming next, it can be really hard, and it can sort of slow you down. So if you just get a minute to take a breath, it helps. That's definitely a big thing, I think, that helps out a lot. The other thing here in these last two, kind of entering the room and starting and finishing the challenge. So entering the room, this one, there's no points for how you walk into the room. But I think this is one that's just good to encourage them to kind of get in the mindset, is walk into the room with purpose. Walk into the room, do something different when you walk into the room to be memorable. Whoever's appraising in that instant challenge room is praising in that instant challenge room all day. And, whether there's, you're at a regional tournament and there's 5 teams in your category, or there's 20 teams in your category, they're still appraising all these teams doing the same challenge over and over again. So be memorable. Do something. Walk in together, all in step. Just whatever your personality, your team dictates, have them walk in and do something. Just because. Whether you get points for it or not, who cares? It's fun. It's a cool thing to do. Kind of gets them in the mood, gets the spirit going right. You're out there having fun, so let's just do that. And then starting and finishing the challenge, make sure, especially if you've got a new team, when they're doing a skit, finish it. When they're building, make sure that they're all on board before they tell the judges they're done. I've had a team who's done that before, where one of the kids called time, and one of the other kids was still actually trying to build something a little taller, and could have if he hadn't called time. So just make sure that they're all on board, kind of coming in as a team, starting as a team, finishing as a team, kind of all the way through, and it just helps. And so as they're practicing these skits, having that strong finish is important. We talked about the signposts earlier, talked about beginning, middle, and end. Have them all know what the end of that skit's going to be, and so they finish it with a flourish. Because people remember how it ended, not always in the middle. So make sure that there's that. And if they're doing building and things like that, make sure that they're doing all these different things. One thing that I actually didn't write down here when you're doing builds, that I meant to write down here, is depending on what the structure is that you're building, and depending on what the materials are that are there, it's not a bad idea to have one or two of your team do a conservative build on whatever it is that you're building. So if there's a tower that needs to be built, and it needs to be 30 inches tall to max the points out, you've got 5 kids on your team, 3 of them are building the tall one, one of them's maybe watching the time and doing some other stuff. Have one of them just take whatever's left of the materials and just start building a real easy conservative tower. Because what inevitably will happen sometimes is that the big tower that you're trying to get up there will fall down with 25 seconds left. And what do? Well, I happen to have this other tower that's 15 inches tall, because that's what I could get out of what I have here, and it's done. So even if we fail, we're still kind of ensuring ourselves that we're going to do okay, even though we won't be doing the 30 inches. It's better than the 3 inches of rubble that's on the table left from the other the tower. Not a bad idea if you can manage it. If you've got a big team, it's always relevant, because if you have a full 7 on your team and they're building, it's rare that you're going to be able to get more than 4 sets of hands on whatever's being built. So you're going to have 3 sets of hands with nothing to do. They can sit behind and give creative ideas and things, but generally they're going to be struggling to look for things to do. And if there's no skit, then really what do they do? So it's a good way to kind of add in there and continue on. and it helps with the teamwork for sure. So as we go into this, and I love this quote here, and it is so true for not just Instant Challenge, but DI in general, is what screws us up most in life is the picture in our heads of how it's supposed to be. When you're approaching IC, that is the enemy, is how it's supposed to be. What is it supposed to be? What does it have to be? Challenge them as they go through these things to push their ideas, not to push their accomplishments, but to push the ideas. I put on here, what's the last whoa idea that they had? And you can probably figure out what a whoa idea is, but if you can't, the whoa idea is when somebody comes up with it, literally out of your mouth comes the word whoa, because that's just the idea. Like, I never thought of that. That is amazing. What an unbelievable thing to think about to do. And you hear them once in a while. They're not super often, but ask them, when they're doing their IC, challenge them a little bit with that. When was the last time one of you came up with one of those? You want to be proud of what you're accomplishing, but you always want to be striving to be improving. There's a balance there too. You don't want to just be like, you guys are terrible, I can't believe that. And I know nobody out there would do that. But you want to make sure that you're celebrating what they're doing, but then, like, what's on the horizon? What else are you capable of there? Could you have thought of something different if you'd had 10 minutes to do it instead of 4? And are you building to those ideas? Because that will keep them sort of searching and reaching and pushing themselves out there and the team out there to kind of get to those. Do they make themselves crack up during Instant Challenge? Whether you're a funny team or you're not a funny team, pushing sort of your comfort zone of what you're doing will make you laugh. If you're not real comfortable doing some dances or something and you get in the middle of the skit and you're doing a dance, it's probably going to kind of crack you up a little bit. Or you might just be the world's worst dancer, and you dancing will make the rest of the team laugh. And you don't care because the rest of the team's laughing. And do they make you crack up? Those are great things to have happen. All three of those. If you could have somebody come up with a whoa idea, they're laughing themselves silly, and you are sitting over in a chair laughing yourself silly during an IC, that's the best IC of all time. That's what you want. You know what I mean? It's just you want them to be doing things that are fun and make them laugh, and they know they're pushing themselves and they're really working their brains to get to these things and out there. And then they're, always kind of be asking, what do you guys want to do differently? What would you have done differently here? Where could you have improved? How did you go to solve it? Did you do all the things in the beginning? When you came up with your idea, was it quick enough for you guys? Would you want to do that faster? Ask them the questions. Point out what you see, but have them answer the questions too. And so it's them improving themselves, not just you telling them what to do. And always keep them moving. I think with Instant Challenge, a lot of them just want to practice them, and they don't want to sort of work at it, but they want to do them. They just want to, let's do some Instant Challenges. It's like, okay, well, that's cool, let's do them, but let's also, gain from them and see what we can do and see how we can learn from these things. Because the skills it's not just about how you build a tower, with what materials do you do it, but how does your team create the idea of the tower, and then how does your team go about executing on that idea? That's what Instant Challenge is about. It's not about building the tower. It's about the process of building the tower. It's about the process of delivering the skit. It's about the process of solving the logic problem. That's what the Instant Challenge is really about. The points are just there to create the activity that you can measure. But the true piece of this is, how does this group of individuals come together in a productive way and operate as a team, as one unit? That's what you're really looking to understand, and realizing that we as a group are so much stronger than me as a person. And I'm just part of this. It's not me, it's us, it's we, and we're a pretty amazing group of kids, and we do some pretty cool stuff here. So that's what you really want to get out of your Instant Challenge. And I think when you can get teams to that point, then practicing instant challenge is not about just figuring, it's like reviewing how do you build stuff out of spaghetti. Great, we got that. We know how to do this because we operate as a team. And once they figure out how to operate as a team, they don't forget, because it's a cool feeling. I think you realize it when you're part of something that's bigger like that. They really do kind of get that, oh, this is what this feels like. Okay, makes good sense to me. I like it. I like it a lot. And the more they do it, the more they're going to want to do it. And I'll tell you what, the teams that are like that, they're fun to watch do things, whether it's instant challenge or central challenge. It's just the teams that are like that and that have made that jump across to the true team. It's just a neat thing to see, and it's a neat experience for them to have. Because I don't think every one of these kids has been on something, been a part of something like that before. And so that's really where you're trying to get to here, and have them realize that. And I think that's the purpose of the instant challenge piece, is to really force them into that team environment. So I encourage you to push them to that and to get them to that, because it'll be a worthwhile exercise for sure, to get them to there. So, and I think so that's what I got. So we usually save about 15 minutes for questions, and we've got 13 minutes and a half left to go here. So I'll open it up for questions one more time. Anybody out there need anything?
I'm still not seeing any questions. You must have done a wonderful job.
Well, it's actually, I just understand it's mid-January, so I will say this one. So thanks for listening on this. I hope it's been helpful. But I will say, at this point in the year, I imagine as team managers, you are all probably feeling the weight of the impending tournament. It's out there. There's not as much time left as you would like to get everything done that needs to get done. I believe me, I know. I have been managing teams now. I think this is my 10th or 11th year. And the kids I have now are very experienced, and you'd think we'd know better, but we're in the same boat. Just I look at the list that they've put up on the wall, and there's just no way they're going to get it done. There's no way. In my head, I worry. I'm just, you get a little short of breath, like, how are they going to get all this done? This isn't a tournament. Look, it's days now. It's not months. It's, oh my gosh, they'll get it done. And whatever they don't get done, they won't get done, and they'll get the tournament, and they'll have a great time, and they'll be great, and they'll be wonderful, and they will have accomplished. And so, good, bad, or indifferent, it'll get there. So just everybody, keep doing what you're doing. It is a great thing that you are doing for these kids. We appreciate it. And even if they don't thank you today, they appreciate it too, and they're getting something great out of it too. So keep it up. Keep pushing them along, and make sure you're all having fun, and we'll see you at the tournaments coming up here in a handful of weeks. So thank you very much.